Welcome, everyone. I'm Mr. Cheese, and any background noise you may hear in this video is entirely not my fault. But these noises may include cats meowing, dogs barking, and children screaming. And the topic of today's video, cheese history in the United States with me, Mr. Cheese. As said like 5 times already. To start, we'll start with the beginning, in the 17th century, when English Puritans began immigrating to what is now known as the United States. Among these English Puritans were dairy farmers. These farmers stuck more north around Rhode Island, Connecticut, and more eastern Massachusetts, and they were the main dairy producers until it moved more westward, Vermont, New York, and also western Massachusetts. After the Revolution, New York was the main cheese state. However, later on, Ohio also went to be referred to as the cheesedom for over 50 years. Cheese production began to grow around this time, and eventually it began to be given as gifts to presidents, large sums of it. One of the more well-known cheese gifts to a president was the Andrew Jackson cheese block. This was given to Andrew Jackson in 1836 of the new year, and it was from Thomas Meckham. I'm going to go with Meckham. He didn't even like Jackson. Thomas Meckham didn't like Andrew Jackson at all, but he still gave him 1,400 pounds of cheese, which was produced from over, I think, around 150 cows. Although opinions of Andrew Jackson were mixed even around this time, the cheese was beloved by the people, and he had it in a lot of parties and all of this stuff, especially a Washington thing. I forgot the word, and I didn't write it down. But the cheese was liked. But however, whenever he after his 8-year reign, Van Buren took over. Van Buren immediately banned food at receptions because parts of the cheese were literally stuck in the carpet after people had walked over them for so long, and the smell, like the mansion, smelled like cheese for months, and they could not get rid of it. Many people know, like in the United States, Wisconsin is actually known as the cheese state, and this is still very true to this day, as they are still the #1 cheese supplier within the United States. And this started in the early 1800s when immigrants from Germany to Norway to, like, all of those sorts of countries around there began to settle in what is nowadays Wisconsin. And most of these settlers started dairy farms. Their cows produced a lot of milk, and so they started to make cheese to preserve the surplus. This will come up again later. And Swiss cheese was one of the most common. In 1841, one of, if not the first, commercial cheese enterprises was created by Ann Pickett, who bought dairy from all separate farmers to make her own cheese. She did not make her own dairy. And then later on, John J. Smith, there seems to be a lot of John Smiths, is the first to produce and sell Wisconsin cheese outside the state, and it begins to spread across the United States. And then in 1864, the first full-scale independent cheese processing factory opened in Ladoga. In in the 1940s, big jump. Over 15,000 factories were in the state of Wisconsin, and they produced 600 varieties of cheese. Just a little fun factoid. However, not all in the cheese world is sunshine and rainbows, because in the 1960s, the cheese war happened. It's not as cool as it sounds. I mean, it's kind of cool. There was this cheese war book that I found that I used as as one of my sources, and one of the direct quotes from the summary is the ensuing cheese war included lies and secrets as well as spies, high emotion, a shoving match, and even a death threat. There was a lot there. So dangerous. The cheese war was specifically in Tillamook County, and they were at war with themselves in the cheese war. There were money issues after production shifted from more smaller factories and then changed into larger factories. And on one side of the battle was Bill Dixon, and the other side was George Milne, who was a farmer. So it was like basically like head slash farmer, and yeah, they did not like each other. It all started because there was dairy shortages beginning to happen, and there was a lot of financial issues as well. And as mentioned, this is when the dairy shortages began to happen. Many farmers were not producing enough dairy or something along those lines, leading to a dairy shortage. And a lot of the prices, there was a lot of stuff happening. And President Carter had to come up with an idea to stop the rising milk prices. So he wanted to put money into the dairy industry, so supply went up and prices dropped. And America then ran into the issue of now having too much milk, leading to a spoilage issue, which then led them to think, oh, well, we're just going to make it into cheese, and then it'll be preserved longer. Yeah, then this turned into a cheese problem. And even with the cheese surplus, the government continued to pour money into the dairy industry. And finally, they put a stop to the whole dairy supply thing in 1981. And they now had 500 million pounds of cheese spread through warehouses in 35 states. In an interview from 1981 from the Washington Post, a VSPA official said probably the most cheapest and most practical thing to do would be to dump it in the ocean. They did not do this. Ronald Reagan had been elected, and to try and hit two birds with one stone, two birds being the surplus of cheese and millions of Americans on government assistance who were unemployed after an economic recession that caused the dairy shortage in the first place. And the stone was the Temporary Emergency Food Assistance Program. Cheese was given to disaster victims, people on welfare, people on Social Security, and people on food stamps. And this is where the term government cheese actually comes from. It wasn't great. Tracy Lynn Lloyd described it as vaguely rubbery, and it doesn't melt so much as congealed when warmed. Now, the government stored this surplus cheese in what was known as a phenomenon of the cheese caves. They're in quotes for a reason. Many people around, like, it popped up again in news sources like 2 years ago or so. But yeah, the cheese caves begin to pop up, and they're not actually that cool. People have been throwing around the number of 1.4 billion pounds of cheese. Um, None of this cheese is actually owned by the government. People keep saying that this is the government-owned cheese that they still have. This is not true. This is actually 1.4 billion pounds of cheese in all types of cheese around the U.S., owned by Kraft, Nestle, and Land O'Lakes, all sorts of companies. And these cheese caves aren't like, sure, they were once limestone mines and caves, but they're not really caves so much as just underground gigantic refrigerators. And the cheese of the caves is also wrong because these warehouses don't just house cheese. They hold all types of things that need to be refrigerated from all sorts of companies. So yeah, sorry to say this. Cheese caves, they may be sort of real, but they're not as cool as they seem. I mean, they're still interesting, of course, because the government had to come up with so many things just to get rid of all of the cheese. And I'm so sorry for my cat. And I mean, yeah, sure, they did. You know, they did used to have cheese warehouses, but the last of the warehouses owned by the government actually shut down in the 1990s. So, yeah, cheese caves aren't that cool and aren't really real. And another thing, the 1.4 billion pounds is not even that much because Christopher Wolf, an agricultural economist, says cheese consumption in the U.S. can total around 13.5 billion pounds per year, meaning the surplus is not just sitting there and gathering more cheese, it's just cycled out. So, yeah, it's really not that cool. Story is cheese is cool. Cheese capes are not real. Andrew Jackson's cheese was better than Andrew Jackson. You didn't get that from me. Um, Tillamook needs to chill out on the cheese wars. And yeah, um, Wisconsin's still top cheese. Sorry, Ohio, I think you were beat.